My name is Sophia, and I, a 32-year-old woman, feel like an old woman, maybe because my pregnancy is already running out, and every minute seems like an eternity. The ninth month is like an endless bridge between expectation and reality, when every breath, every step makes it clear that a new life will soon begin its journey under the same sky. But today is a special day. My husband and I went to his mother's house, barely half an hour away, to her famous peach cobbler, which she bakes only on holidays or when she is really happy. Our trip seems ordinary, because we come here often, once or twice a month, but today my mother-in-law has a special inspiration. She was always able to notice the slightest desires of her loved ones, and when I first mentioned that I would like to try her famous pie again, she seemed to have decided that it was time to put her special recipe on the table. Since the day we announced my pregnancy, she has found a new purpose in the depths of her heart, especially after she lost her husband last year. His departure left a void in her, but the appearance of her first grandson seemed to fill this vacuum with meaning. Her face, like a sunbeam in a foggy day, glows with joy when she thinks about how she will hold a small creature in her arms. However, this light is overshadowed by tension, because not all family members welcomed the news with joy. My sister-in-law, Rachel, has been married to my husband's brother for 6 years. Her struggle with infertility has become a test for her that has sunk into her soul. The treatment that began 2 years ago did not bring results, leaving her in a state of sullen detachment, like a wounded animal that hides to lick its wounds. It's hard for me to blame her for being cold. After all, her dreams of motherhood seem to be drowning in a bottomless ocean of disappointment. My mother-in-law usually tries to arrange meetings in such a way as to avoid Rachel's presence, protecting her wounded soul and trying to prevent possible conflicts. But this time it turned out differently. Rachel, to my surprise, was here when we arrived. On the threshold, we were greeted by her figure, drowning in a strict gray sweater. I just managed to pull on a smile as she pursed her lips and, glancing at me, gave out, "It's been a long time, Sophia. You look like you've put on a lot of weight. Are you sure it's not just laziness from pregnancy?" Her eyes narrowed like two icy points. It burned me, my cheeks burned, and the words stalled on the tip of my tongue. But before I could answer, my husband stepped forward, shielding me with his presence, and turning to Rachel, said, "She's 9 months pregnant, her belly should be big. Don't you dare talk to her like that." Rachel just rolled her eyes, pretending to be offended. "I'm just taking care of her health," she said, "because she shouldn't gain too much weight. It's bad for the baby." "Thank you, Rachel. I'll try to be more careful," I replied quietly, not wanting to inflate the tension. But Rachel obviously wasn't going to stop. She grinned and threw over her shoulder, "If you have so much strength to answer, maybe you should try cleaning up. A little exercise definitely won't hurt." She literally shoved a broom and a dustpan into my hands, as if checking how much I was ready to remain silent and obey. Before I could react, my mother-in-law, who was patiently watching us, intervened in the conversation. "Sophia is our guest, and she came to relax." Her voice sounded firm and unyielding, like a stone standing in the path of a wave. Rachel snorted and, without saying a word, stomped upstairs, leaving us in a thick cloud of tense silence that froze in the air for a moment like dew on a spider's web. Despite this difficult start, the rest of the day brought peace. A deafening silence pierced me as Rachel's words fell like shards of ice into the room. There was no hint of remorse in her gaze, only a cold, implacable light, as if all this horror she had caused was just a misunderstanding, an unpleasant little thing that could be solved with a deal. "Let's settle this." Her voice was flat, almost lifeless, like the sound of drops on cold glass. "We are ready to pay you to drop all charges." These words hit me like a strong gust of wind, leaving a bitter, acrid feeling inside, not just resentment, but something deeper, like poison soaked into the blood. I looked at her, not believing that in front of me was not just a relative, but a woman who brought down so much pain and fear on me and my unborn daughter. A sudden flash of memory, her fist, the brutal blow, the indifference in my eyes when I screamed for help. This moment branded my heart like a burn, leaving a mark in it that will never heal. My husband was standing next to me, his face was pale, and I saw him trying in vain to find words to express all that was gnawing at him, but, as if depressed and stunned, he was silent, as if he did not dare to break this tense moment. His gaze darted from me to Rachel, reflecting silent suffering, disappointment, anger, shame that this terrible act turned out to be part of his life, part of his family. I took a deep breath without taking my eyes off Rachel's face, feeling the pain gradually flow into a calm but unyielding sense of determination. My hands were shaking, but I clenched them into fists, feeling every nerve in my body pierced with confidence. How can she think that money can patch up this wound, make amends for what almost destroyed everything I hold dear? Do you think that money can fix everything? My voice was low, but there was enough power in it to sound like an echo bouncing off the cold walls of a hospital room. Do you think that a few bills can bring me back peace and tranquility? Rachel, your punch almost cost me my daughter's life. You've hurt both of us, and it can't be measured in money. Rachel pressed her lips together, her face twitched, but her eyes remained as cold as frozen stone. She turned away, as if my words were about something far away that had nothing to do with her. Her husband, standing next to her, looked broken. He looked at me with undisguised longing, as if he was aware of everything that was collapsing around them now. At that moment, my mother-in-law entered the room. Her face was tired, her features were burdened with traces of recent sleepless nights. She froze, catching the tension in the air, looked at me, at Rachel, and seemed to read everything that remained unspoken in the looks and restrained gestures. "Rachel, you must have the wrong door," she said slowly, but there was a subtle steel in her words, an underlying determination that I hadn't noticed in her before. "There is no place for deals here." I felt a wave of anger rising inside me, swift and overwhelming. My words seemed to come out of my mouth, burning the air. "You're crazy. How could you endanger my child's life?" Rachel's husband, said, who had been standing aside until that moment, trying not to get involved, took a step forward, trying to return the conversation to its usual course. His voice sounded muffled and distant, as if he was just performing a long-familiar role. "Sophia, just take the money. It will save us all a lot of trouble," he said, avoiding eye contact with me. I gritted my teeth, feeling rage fill me with determination. "No. I'll see you in court," I snapped. "Go away." Before they could respond, my husband took a step forward, ending the conversation. His voice, normally calm, now sounded firm and even cold. "Do you think you can buy a way out of this? You're lucky I'm not suing for attempted murder," he said to Rachel. Rachel's face darkened. Her smug expression wavered, and something resembling fear flashed in her eyes. She muttered something about it being an accident, but we weren't listening anymore. Everything was finally decided for us. On the same day, my husband and I filed a police report. The trial began, which exhausted and took away all our strength. Rachel tried to play the victim, claiming that she never wanted to hurt me and that her act was caused by a temporary disorder caused by unbearable jealousy and bitterness. She tried to justify herself by saying that she was under pressure from circumstances. But the evidence spoke for itself. Medical records, witness statements, footprints on my body, all this has become indisputable evidence. The court found Rachel guilty of assault, and she was obliged to pay a fine, as well as undergo mandatory counseling with a psychologist. My husband and I understood that, despite this, it was impossible to stay close to the family in which such a tragic betrayal happened. We made the decision to move away, leaving Rachel and her sick, destructive toxicity behind. We changed phone numbers and severed all ties with Rachel and her husband. It was a hard blow for my mother-in-law, who, despite what happened, continued to try to reconcile with her children. She understood that we were doing this for the safety of our family, but it still hurt her to realize that her daughter was on the sidelines. After a few months, our baby became strong enough to come home. I could hardly believe my eyes, looking at her tiny face, which shone with an innocent smile, as if all she knew was only warmth and care. This moment brought with it an amazing sense of peace, a feeling that the nightmare was finally over and that we were no longer subject to the shadow that Rachel cast. Rachel's own life, as we learned later, also went downhill. Her marriage collapsed, her husband could not bear the burden of her actions and left, leaving her alone. She was fighting for her existence, desperately trying to get on with her life. But despite everything, I didn't feel satisfied with her fall. I was too focused on healing and the happiness of my own family, on forgetting those dark days and building something new. Justice was served, and we continued to move forward. Our little family turned out to be stronger than I could have imagined. The support of my husband and mother-in-law has been invaluable, helping me find a new meaning in every day. Remembering that terrible moment, I saw in it only one important lesson: we, as a family, coped with the pain, and now nothing will break us. A few weeks later, we moved into a new apartment, leaving behind our old house and everything connected with it. In our new city, peace and quiet awaited us, a new stage that had to be passed step by step. My daughter was slowly recovering, and every breath she took, every look she gave me, was a living testimony to what we had been through. We began to get used to our new life, a new routine, and every moment brought me confidence that something bright and serene was waiting for us now. I was lying on the couch, trying not to move once again, so as not to disturb the wound that was still aching after the operation. In the evening silence of our new home, I finally felt safe, away from all troubles and worries, but this calmness turned out to be deceptive. Suddenly, I was shocked by a loud, frantic knock on the door, which sent a chill down my spine. "Hey! I know you're there, Sophia. Come here, you coward." Rachel's harsh, shrill voice rang out from outside. I froze when I heard her, not believing my ears. How did she find us? How does she know our new location? After all, we hid so carefully, changed all contacts, cutting off old ties. My husband was still at work, and there was no one else in the apartment except me. A wave of panic shot through me to the very heart. I tried to take a deep breath, to calm down, but anxiety bound me like steel chains. "What the hell are you doing here?" I shouted, trying to sound confident. "Rachel, you're bothering everyone around. Please leave. No matter how many times you hide, I'll find you." A shrill scream echoed through the quiet corridors of the building, her voice trembling with despair and rage. "You have to listen to me. Everything is ruined because of you." Her words were filled with some kind of insane accusation, but the meaning eluded me, and the rage in her voice became more and more frightening. I wanted to believe that she was just temporarily broken and needed help, but fear for myself and for my daughter kept me from that thought. I knew I couldn't open the door. Elderly people and families lived in the building, and their peace was as important to me as my own safety. "Rachel, I'm sorry you're upset, but you need to leave," I said, gathering my strength and forcing my voice to sound firm. "I'll call the police." "Please, Sophia, just listen to me." Suddenly her voice broke into tears, and the banging on the door became even stronger, as if this was her last opportunity to express all the pain and resentment that had accumulated inside. "You've ruined everything. It's because of you that I lost my husband, my life. It's not fair that you can be happy when I'm unhappy." Her screams, full of bitterness, echoed down the hallway, and I felt my throat constrict from the tears coming. Why does she see me as an enemy? Why did my pregnancy become something like an endless competition for her, in which she considers herself a loser? I leaned back against the door, closing my eyes, feeling the weight of her accusations, although I never sought to surpass or offend her. It was never a competition for me, and I couldn't understand why she blamed me for her misfortunes. "Rachel, you need help," I said softly, hoping to quench her rage a little. "Hurting me won't change anything." But in response, her voice became even more venomous, as if I had just added fuel to the fire. "You should have waited. First I had to get pregnant, and you didn't even think about me, about my feelings. You should have considered that." I couldn't hear the rest of it anymore. Her tirade was torn into screams and snatches of phrases, but the next second it seemed to me that sirens were wailing somewhere outside. One of the neighbors must have called the police. As if sensing this moment, Rachel also seemed to hear them. There was a note of panic in her screams, her confidence was shaken, and her rage gave way to fear. One day, as I watched my little girl sleeping peacefully in her crib, I felt a long-awaited calm return to my heart. In the semi-darkness, her tiny hand clutched the corner of the blanket, and this sight seemed to me the personification of victory over all the fears and trials that had befallen us. It's hard to believe that this moment once seemed almost unattainable to me, and now, as silence enveloped our house, I felt free from the shadow that Rachel had left in the past. After that evening, when she stood in front of our door, screaming and begging for help, it became clear to me that our presence in her life was causing her more and more pain. I knew she needed professional help, but then I couldn't afford to protect her. The officers arrived quickly and started asking her questions right at the door. Through the gap, I explained to them everything that had happened, and at that moment my husband returned home. As soon as I saw him, the tears I was holding back burst out. He hugged me, listening to me, sobbing, recounting the events of the last few minutes. His face turned grim, and turning to the police, he said firmly, "You need to take her away. She's dangerous." Rachel was handcuffed and taken away, and her screams, full of despair and resentment, echoed through the quiet corridors for a long time. That night, her husband called me. His voice was trembling, as if he himself was on the verge. "Sophia, I'm divorcing Rachel," he said, and there was a final determination in his tone. "I can't handle her anymore. Please don't drag me into this mess." I froze, stunned by his words, trying to comprehend how he might be ready to just leave her after all the events. "Are you going to leave her?" I asked, not hiding my surprise. "Yes. I have to," he replied softly, as if he didn't expect me to understand. "If I don't do this, I will lose my job. After what happened at the hospital, my boss already found out about everything, and I was transferred to the regional office. I can't keep covering for her. Just please don't drag me into this." His words sounded like an excuse, but a storm of conflicting feelings flared up inside me. Yes, part of me felt sorry for him, but the other part couldn't forget that he stood next to Rachel when she tried to bribe us. He was just as guilty as she was. In the weeks that followed, Rachel's life continued to crumble like a house of cards in the wind. The lawsuits had drained what little savings she had, and her reputation had taken a serious hit. She went from one friend to another until, eventually, she was left alone. Everyone she trusted left when faced with her unbearable behavior. She had no choice but to get a part-time job in order to somehow survive. Meanwhile, my husband and I were doing everything we could to rebuild our lives. We changed our phone numbers again, cut off all ties with the past and focused on our daughter's health. A few months later, she was finally discharged from the hospital, and every day she became stronger and stronger, and we felt that all our efforts were worth it. Now, looking at my daughter's peaceful face, I felt that we were finally where we should be, safe and at peace. Every morning I woke up with a feeling of gratitude, as if a light, barely noticeable light penetrated my heart, filling it with warmth. We went through so many trials, saw ourselves on the verge of despair, but finally we were able to free ourselves from the poisonous influence of Rachel, to free ourselves from those days when fear and anxiety surrounded us like clouds. As if cleansing our souls, my husband and I built a new life, step by step, pulling away from everything that pulled us back, like from the wreckage of a wrecked ship. My mother-in-law stayed in touch with us, and in every conversation her words were soaked with regret. She was trying to make amends for the mistakes of the past, apologizing, as if her apologies could erase the traces of pain left by Rachel. Despite the fact that this communication was painful for her, she understood why we kept our distance. Sometimes I heard people whisper that Rachel, left alone, was gradually drowning in debt, having no one around, no friends, no family, no hope that someone would reach out to her. She was trying to survive, but now her life was like an endless struggle with windmills, and each new step led to an even bigger abyss. Sometimes I caught myself with a strange feeling, pity, a slight pang of compassion that awakened at the thought of what her life was like now. But remembering that night when she stood at my door, screaming about her right to someone else's happiness, and remembering how she put my daughter's life at risk, I felt this feeling quickly fade away, as if someone had put out a carelessly lit candle. Rachel had made her choice, had paved the path that led her to this end, and now she had to pay the price. My husband and I decided that it was time for our family to really start with a clean slate. We moved to a new city surrounded by hills and green forests, where every corner seemed to us a symbol of renewal and freedom. There, far from the nightmares of the past, we became surrounded by a supportive community, people who accepted us without even knowing the whole story, and soon we found real friends. Our house was filled not only with furniture and things, but also with tranquility, warmth, and a sense of security, which we lacked so much. Gradually, the scars left by the hard events began to fade, and the days when I thought about the past became less frequent. Our daughter grew up strong and healthy, her ringing laughter spread through the house like music, filling our days with joy and happiness. With each of her smiles, I felt that my husband and I had made the right decision, that all our efforts, every trial, were worth this happiness and this silence that now surrounded us. Rachel's story, however, ended on a much sadder note. She was left alone, an outcast in the eyes of society, her reputation destroyed, and the support of friends and acquaintances scattered like ashes in the wind. She has become a shadow of herself, what was once a bright and confident woman. I was no longer afraid of the thought of her. Her image, which had previously tormented me in the silence of the night, was completely dispelled. And I no longer cared about her fate. All my thoughts, all my heart now belonged to my family. We found our freedom, broke out of Rachel's shadow, and finally felt that we lived in a world where peace and happiness reigned. Now our lives were moving forward, and that was the only thing that mattered.